Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about an older film. This film is called See No Evil, Hear No Evil. This film stars Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. I unfortunately do not know this director is listed on the back here, on Arthur Hiller. Really don't know what else he's worked on. Looked at him about online not too long ago, and I really didn't recognize anything when I looked him up there either. But I have heard about this film specifically, and that's really the reason why I wanted to track it down and finally sit down and watch it. And also, the fact that Gene Wilder passed away not too long ago. So, though it would have been nicer to have, this review probably up closer to around the time of his death, I still eventually got around to seeing it. And obviously Richard Pryor's been gone for a while now too. But um, these two really worked together well in this movie. So this movie's about, and this is kind of what intrigued me about seeing this film, is just kind of how different this story is compared to other things I've heard about. And that's about a deaf man and a blind man who work together at this retail place. And one day there was a situation that happened where, because one of them's deaf and the other one's blind, there's certain situations where one or both of them really don't know what's going on just because they have a disability of some kind, they're handicapped in some way, and so this murder happens. Obviously, with Gene Wilder being deaf, he wasn't able to hear what happened, what the people were saying. He had his face turned away, so he couldn't read the lips of people or anything like that. And Richard Pryor, since he's blind, all he can do is hear the situation. He has no idea who was talking to who, how many people were in the room at the time, and stuff like that. So these two men eventually figure out that there is this dead man in the middle of the store, and everybody around them outside of the store thinks that these two men are responsible for it. And obviously, them being there when it happened, they're aware that it did happen. But how this man passed away and so forth, and how he got killed and who got away with this, they have to figure this out themselves because at the moment everybody thinks that they're the one that committed the murder. And so throughout the course of this film, they have to figure out what exactly happened, who had a grudge against this guy, why they specifically were at this store, what was at that store that caused a person to do this to this person, and so forth. So this film explains all those answers throughout the course of the film, and believe it or not, it's actually quite a comedic ride getting to those answers. So overall, guys, I thought See No Evil, Hear No Evil is definitely a great film. It's definitely a film that I don't think enough people have heard about. It's one of those films where if you've heard about it and you're intrigued by the concept, you probably have either heard of it at least, or possibly have seen it too. But for those who have never heard of it or never seen it, or really don't know what else Gene Wilder worked on besides, like Young Frankenstein or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and so forth. And if you just kind of know who Richard Pryor is, but you maybe were never really exposed to what he did as an actor or a comedian, it's definitely one of those films where just kind of got buried away. And like I said, if you really were not invested in these two men to begin with, it just kind of was forgotten about. And that's really too bad because I think there's a lot of things about this film that really are kind of interesting and different in a way that we really haven't seen a comedy specifically play out like this, which I think what makes it so unique. So for my positives and negatives of this film, you guys, I think it's a great and funny concept for a film. Just a blind man and a deaf man being accused of this murder that they cannot commit, and the fact that they have to figure it out and so forth. That was a very funny concept. It was great. They really emphasized the fact that one of them was blind and one of them was deaf. And to me personally, I don't think they were too offensive about it. Some people might think differently. I think they definitely played it up enough where they did it for laughs and not so much laughing at these people, but while laughing with them, as to they have really no clue what someone was whispering to somebody if their lips are hiding from them and stuff. And for the case of a blind person, obviously they're not going to have any idea visually of what's going on. Someone has to explain that to them. They have to feel it. They have to hear it. And if they don't have that ability, they're really not going to know what's going on. So the film definitely plays off that in a very clever way. And that goes on to my next point. I thought Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder had very funny screen chemistry in this movie. They really played off of each other very well. Um, they definitely shared the screen in a very appropriate way. They definitely found comedy in any way that they could with certain situations, and it really works out pretty well in this movie. I also thought the twist with the villain, which I can't go into too much detail on because it would be spoiler territory for those who are planning on eventually watching this movie. But I thought the villain twist in this movie was very fitting for this film, specifically for this kind of story. It felt very fitting for the challenges that Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder's characters face throughout this movie. It just felt like a very fitting villain to have, kind of as your twist villain for a movie like this. This film also has a very fitting length. I think if they made it any longer, any shorter, it either would have felt too short or too long. So I think they definitely covered everything that they possibly could, got everything they possibly could out of the story. So it just was kind of a very appropriate length for this film. I kind of left the film feeling like everything they could have possibly covered was covered here. So I think that's something to say to both the editor and the director for making it just the right length, and possibly the writer as well, because making a story too short or too long could kind of make your story feel a little unfulfilled, and that's something that I'm glad that this film avoided doing. I also thought the two characters really did bond over the course of this film. There's films like this where maybe the two characters really are never friends. They just kind of figure it out and then they just kind of part ways by the end of the movie. But I really felt like these two men really did bond throughout this movie. It was kind of cool to see, who knows, maybe Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder didn't get along on the set of this movie, but somehow, some way, this film makes it look like they did, that their friendship grew throughout the course of the story. And I think that says something about just how well developed these characters are, how they kind of learn from this experience, kind of how this in over their heads experience with this murder really helped them become, not only better people, but realize, what they could do to their absolute limits with their disabilities and still figure out this situation in the best way they possibly could. I also like how the film, there was a lot of moments where Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder are trying to quote unquote be normal with everybody else to kind of fit in so people aren't catching on to these two guys are accused of doing this bad murder and so forth. And in the parts where they're trying to be normal, it really is pretty funny. They do things that help each other out in some ways, but as a result, everybody else around them is like, what the heck are these guys doing? Like Gene Wilder making loud footsteps so Richard Pryor can hear him to not get the impression that he can't see anything. And the fact that Richard Pryor has to exactly tell Gene Wilder right at his face with his lips what exactly is going on or what a person wants out of him and so forth. So there's moments like that that I think really make this film feel special and funny in a way that I really have never seen before in a comedy. But for my negatives of this film, because it's not quite a perfect film, I do think Gene Wilder's best film for me personally is probably still Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, for me personally anyway. But for my negatives, I do think the film cheats at times. There's a few moments, specifically with Richard Pryor's character, where I really don't think a blind person could have figured out by themselves without assistance and so forth. There's one scene where he has to run through a hallway and make around certain obstacles and so forth. There's small little moments like that where he cheats and has no help at all from Gene Wilder. And there's moments like that where it's just like, okay, maybe, no, I don't think somebody could be, with that kind of a problem, could face that kind of problem head on, and so forth. So there's little cheats at times that kind of feel a little bad throughout the course of this film. Also, I thought the whole thing with one of them being blind and one of them being deaf, by the end of the film, it kind of got a little old. You could tell they were starting to run out of jokes. With one of them not being able to see and the other one not being able to hear and so forth. There's just a few little jokes towards the end of the film. It's like, okay, it's a little old now. Let's try to find something else. And unfortunately, it can't find that other form of humor to just get through the rest of the story. It just kind of repeats the jokes from earlier in the movie, and the jokes kind of fall flat closer towards the end of the runtime. There's also some cheap green screen effects here. There's definitely a scene here where, though it's funny and though it's well filmed and so forth, with Richard Pryor driving a car and Gene Wilder have to giving him immediate directions to where to go and so forth, since his hands are handcuffed and he can't drive himself and so forth. There's a really cheap green screen effect that they use when they're on the highway, and though that would be a very hard scene to film with these two actors, doing all these funny things and so forth. When they are in the car and it's clearly a green screen behind them, it really does look very bad. It really does feel like something they probably did in a studio at the last minute before this film was released. And unfortunately, over time, all the way here in 2016, it really doesn't look that great. But overall, I'm going to give See No Evil, Hear No Evil an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's a clever comedy that kind of got buried away over time that I really do think more people should see and track down. I was able to find my copy on Amazon for a pretty reasonable price. New and factory sealed for roughly about $6, so it's not too bad of a find. It's not too expensive of a find either. Um, and for those who don't know, too, very young Kevin Spacey is in this film. He's right there, very very young. I barely recognized him while watching this film. He was really really young when they filmed it. But like I said, very good movie. Um, it's just a film that I think more people should witness and see and give a chance to. Rotten Tomatoes wasn't too favorable on this movie, but I personally think it's a much better film that some critics gave it credit for. I think Roger Ebert himself didn't like this movie too much, but I like the movie. You should check it out too. Like I said, it's not Gene Wilder's best film or anything, or probably even Richard Pryor's, but it's definitely a hidden gem that I think more people should watch. And there's problems with it, but I think everybody should give it at least one chance with watching it.